From Florence, Italy, the city of inspiration for sculptors in ages past and for centuries to come, you're listening to The Sculptor's Funeral.
Good day to you all, and welcome once again to another episode of The Sculptor's Funeral. I am your host, Jason Arkles, a sculptor and educator living in Florence, Italy, where all the great sculptors are dead, and I don't feel so well myself. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about tools. Sculptor's tools, or more specifically, tools used in the production of our clay models and maquettes. A sculptor's tools, especially the instruments used in clay and wax modeling, are a highly individualized and personal thing. I think most of us have found what works best for each of us in order to get the job done. Out of the dozen or so mass production brands of tools like Kemper and Taranti, and the hundreds of different shapes that modeling tools are available in, we might find that, after a period of exploration as students, we settle individually on 4 or 5 tools that we might use for 90% of our modeling. The tools we select, to a certain extent, determines our individual mark-making in clay, our handwriting, if you will. And I don't know a single sculptor who hasn't added to his arsenal of go-to clay tools a few makeshift tools, sort of appropriated implements not originally meant for clay modeling, from chopsticks to spoons, pieces of window screen, paintbrushes, toothbrushes, spatulas, and screwdrivers. And then, of course, there's that third class of tool, the ones we make ourselves. Whittled and sharpened sticks, twisted wires, kidneys cut from Tupperware, and so on. At times, we've all had that need for that perfect tool that would be just right, but doesn't exist, and so we have to make it ourselves. Or sometimes we have the right tool, but it just isn't as good as it could be. Maybe a tool is the right shape, but perhaps it's too blunt or too short. If only a tool were a little longer or a little thinner, or made of a different material, or just of higher quality. In this episode of The Sculptor's Funeral, I talked to several sculptors who have gone the extra mile and made the tools they need to suit their needs. Each of these sculptors have not only succeeded in making their own tools, but they have found a following amongst other sculptors as well. So not only do they make their own tools, but they offer them for sale to others as well. These sculptors aren't in the full-time business of mass-producing tools for the art supply market, but instead craft their tools by hand and sell them as a sideline to sculptors who appreciate quality handmade tools. My first interview is with the sculptor Matt Kindy. I met Matt over a decade ago in Minnesota on a sculpture workshop. He had made his own clay modeling tools, which I greatly admired, and he was kind enough to give me one, which became my favorite tool for years. Just recently, I got 4 more of Matt Kindy's clay modeling tools, and I called Matt to talk to him about how he goes about making his tools, and to discuss with him why I find that his tools are some of the best I've used, as well as simply being the most elegant and beautiful clay tools I own. So, actually, could you tell me a little bit about the wood that you use? It's called eBay, is that right?
It's called Ipe wood,
Ipe.
and it's typically it comes out of I want to say Central and South America, down that way anyhow. Right. And it's an exotic wood. It's very dense, very hard. It's used up here for decking. Yeah, when you're in the shop, you have a concrete floor, and you take a piece of wood and you drop it on its end, just from a little ways up.
Yeah. And,
just for comparison purposes, a 2x4 pine is just going to be more of a punk, But when you drop Ipe or Purple Heart or some of those more dense woods, they just ping. It hits the ground. It's almost like dropping a piece of steel.
Right, it rings.
It's so dense. It rings. There's yep. And this is one of those. And, those walnut tools, and you had one, a small detail one that you had picked up at that workshop, actually.
Yeah.
And that snapped on you. And I had that problem. A few other people snapped them, too. And I think it's when that earth and clay starts to stiffen is when you're more likely, and you try to move a mass. When they're more likely to snap.
I have to say, I was abusing it a bit. I was using some stiffer clay, and I was just like, no, it'll do it. It's been really good, and then, just snapped. So no, it was user error. But this actually, yeah, the tools in Ipe that you've sent me are much different, have a different feel. I think I remember the walnut almost having like a slightly porous feel, like you could feel the grain a little bit.
Yep. It's more porous wood, which means it's not as tight a grain and it's not as dense. You know, it all translates to that, which is why I thought this Ipe would just be beautiful, especially with the give, you know, that feel that you get in the shaft.
Right, and that's actually, I have to say, this is why you're even, you know, the last tool you made me, you know, 10 years ago, and these three are just absolutely fantastic. Because what I always really loved about steel tools, you see, for a while I went from wood tools to using steel tools like plaster tools. Because, you know, a nice thin steel blade has that responsiveness and springiness to it, which I really, really like. I think it really helps me with sort of my clay handwriting, if you will, my handling. And your tools are the only ones that I've ever seen.
No different than a paintbrush.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a difference between a stiff bristle and a softer bristle. And your tools are the only ones that I've ever used that are wood, that have a little bit of give, even with just a, you know, slight pressure. I mean, they're not bendy. They're not like, you know, willow branches or anything. They're not vines. You know, they're good and stiff, but just with a little bit of give at the tip. I love them.
You can feel the clay on the other end of the tool.
Exactly.
And I started making this spoon one for your larger surfaces, and you could still get that feeling. You know, I'm thinking breasts, buttocks, shoulders, stuff like that, and you still get that. You're covering a larger area than say a smaller tool. So it's still a detailed tool, but you're just covering. It's for those bigger surfaces, you know,
right.
those, you know.
Yeah, I do. Actually, I think it'd come in handy with hair and drapery, especially. Especially the interior curves of drapery. I think it's a really nice shape. So now, how did you get into? Well, actually, let me ask you, how did you get into sculpture? And how long have you been a sculptor? And what actually got you into
Wow. Well, you know, it's all a big flow chart, because I'm a furniture maker, and of course that led to wood carving. And I studied under Konstantinos Papadakis. He's a Greek master out of Minneapolis, and I still do a lot of that. And then, of course, that led to sculpture. And I'll never forget it. I had a commission, and it was an eagle picking up a fish off of, you know, the surface of a lake. And so I thought, before I carve into this, you know, 3.5-inch thick piece of walnut, and it was a basal relief, I thought I'd better do it in clay, obviously. Mm-hmm. And that led to sculpting. And so I did a few pieces on my own, some just relief pieces on board, of figures and stuff. And I thought, wow, I really enjoy this. And then I went over. That led me to the Minnesota River School of Fine Art, and I sculpted there. And then I took your course, which absolutely changed the way I looked at it, you know. And the second you change the way you look at it, then it just, you know, that really changed the way I sculpt. No doubt about it. And I would say that was back in about,
I think it was 2004.
Well,
I want to say 2004 when I
somewhere
taught
in there, and I had started sculpting prior to that, mm-hmm. you know. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would say right in 2004, 2003, 2004, somewhere in there, yeah.
Yeah, it was in the winter. I definitely remember being in Minneapolis in the winter. So you started out as a furniture maker, and you still are a furniture maker.
Oh, I still make furniture, and actually I'm working on a piece. Well, I haven't started it yet, but it's all designed and everything, and I'm really just waiting for the first deposit. And it's an iconostasi, an icon screen for a Greek Orthodox church in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
And so it'll be about a 10, 11 month project. And so I'm just kind of waiting on that. And, you know, it's kind of nice. It's winter here, and it's colder than hell. And so I'm inside doing some painting, and I do have a sculpture going, a figure piece.
Fantastic. And I guess with your dual interest of, woodworking and sculpture, that is what led you into making your own tools. Now, did you do it out of an interest of just to see, how you would make your own tools, or were you sort of dissatisfied with the tools that you found for sculpture?
The latter. I was dissatisfied. I was getting the Kemper tools just off the shelf up at Continental Clay, and they're good, and they have their use. And believe me, I still have a full set of wire loops, and I have a knife similar to the one that I sent you, on a different end. But I use that for just so much of my rough-in, And it's just very handy for that when I start to get to the finer detail, though there's something missing in their tools. There's along with the feel and stuff. And so, yes, to answer your question, I wasn't totally satisfied with those tools. And yes, and then of course with the woodworking, I just made some, and I think I brought them to class. The ones I made, I brought them to class one time, and Mary Pat Lutz was like, "Where did you get that tool?" And I said, "Well, I made it." And so I started, I made just a huge run of them, and I left them in a paper grocery bag there in the closet in the sculpture department, and this is this little side business. Students would, throw checks in there and take one of each,
Oh, fantastic.
So, and there's a delicateness about these, and they're not used for rough-in, and such. I mean, they are finishing tools, in my opinion. And I think from now on, I'll always make them out of Ipe, or something along those lines.
It's a beautiful tool. It's a beautiful wood. Now, is this stained, or is this the natural color, this sort of dark, warm brown?
It's the natural color. It's the natural color. And then I have several coats of lacquer over it.
Ah, that's what I was going to ask, if you oiled or lacquered these. Okay, so there's several coats of lacquer.
Lacquered.
Right. Now, is there something I can do to preserve these? Because these 4 tools, I'm gonna make sure that these 4 tools last my career, because they are absolutely gorgeous, elegant sorts of things. Is there something I can do to preserve the lacquer finish, or should I refinish them periodically?
I would just say keep them clean. I wouldn't leave them soaked in it is wood, and really any finish, is susceptible to water penetration.
Sure.
And the ends, are very fine. So that's where you're gonna see it. But if you start to break through the lacquer with use, which would happen over time, because clay has not plastilina, but earth and clay has that sort of abrasive, to it. You're gonna start to lose that end. And so what I would do once you start to see that is exactly just shoot a little more lacquer on the ends of them.
Okay.
But that wouldn't happen for some time. It's a pretty good coat of lacquer on there.
Yeah, excellent. How much does a set of these tools run, or do you sell them individually?
I would say in the ePay, you're probably looking at $35-40 a tool. I hadn't given it much thought prior to our interview, because I haven't really sold these for some time. When I used to sell them at the school, they were $25 a piece.
Right.
And I thought that was a really pretty good deal.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, these are sort of heirloom tools. These are not,
they're like a really good paintbrush that you're going to have around.
Yeah.
And of course, they're very identical from one tool to the next, in the same tool, but they are handmade and hand shaped, and it's like, it's like getting used to something with a shape and a curve. You learn that tool, you learn what you're doing with each end and surface,
exactly,
as you learn it. And that's probably no different than a really good paintbrush. As you use it, it takes on it breaks in.
Yeah.
And so these are hand shaped, and but they're still, that said, it's not like there's crazy surfaces as you have them in front of you there. I mean, they're consistent.
I was just gonna say, yeah. I mean, they're not crazy unusual shapes that I'm not used to. They're not. It's not something.
Right.
It's not like a completely different animal. These are familiar shapes that I know what to do with already.
Yeah, but I think these are tools that you'll have you'll have those tools forever, Jason. And of course, if you don't push on, it is a stronger wood and less porous, so those shafts are much stronger than the walnut. But don't think for a second, if you did a wrench on it, that it you certainly could break that shaft.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is just going beyond the use of them. They're really detailed tools.
Right, exactly.
Which is why that you want that feeling when you're doing detail work.
Exactly. For instance, I wouldn't use my my plaster, my steel plaster tools on anything too rough. They're obviously a finishing or small scale sort of tool. I think these would actually be great sketch model tools as well. Doing small bozzetti, just like little, clay sketch compositions a few inches high, which I do
for sure.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah.
For that. Yeah.
The knife, that can be used in some detail work.
For me, the knife is for me, the knife is the workhorse. I use a blade tool probably more than I do anything else, actually.
Yeah, so do I. I use that Kemper knife all the time.
Yeah, the Kemper JA4.
I believe that's it. It's got a nice soft blunt nose to it. You're not cutting in real fine.
Yeah, but you know what
But
you know what I do with the Kemper tools? I actually sharpen them. I whittle them down a little bit to get a more of a sharper blade on them. I can't get any sort of flexibility to them because they're made out of boxwood or whatever. But yeah, I always assume that the clay tools that you buy, the sort of commercial Kemper or Tiranti, they're almost like blanks, really. They're sort of shape blanks that you need to hone and refine. Just as though, if you were to buy a quality knife, you would take it home and sharpen it. And it's the same sort of thing. I always sharpen my tools, my clay tools. I won't be sharpening yours,
though. I totally agree.
I won't be sharpening yours, though. There's absolutely no need. No, yours are perfect. So if someone wanted to contact you to order a set or order one, how can they do that? Do you have a website?
I would say contact me on my Facebook. I do not have a website, though. That is something I really need to do. But I have a Facebook business page, Matthew Kindy LLC.
Matthew Kindy
LLC. You can, MatthewKindy is in dog, LLC. And if you contact me there, we can set you up with tools.
Fantastic. I'll make sure to post pictures of the tools that you sent me on the Sculptor's Funeral website for the image gallery for this episode, which is I think episode number 49. I'll make sure I'll post pictures so people can see. I might even take a video just so I can sort of turn these in my hand so people can see just how fine and elegant these are. They really, really are. There's something special.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I gotta say, I gotta give you a little plug, though it is your show. I love the podcast and
thank
all
you
that.
So much.
It's just I love that one. And the technical stuff too on the clay firing. What a great episode.
Wow. Well, thank you very much.
Just
Thanks.
a fantastic episode. I don't know where else you'd get that sort of. You can. What I like about it is I can casually listen to it while I'm, having coffee and maybe doing something else, and it's just fantastic. Keep up the good work. Great.
Well, Matt Kindy, thank you so much, and thanks for coming on to the Sculptor's Funeral. I really do appreciate it, and thank you again for the tools.
Yeah.
They are lovely.
You are most welcome. Thank you, Jason.
My next guest, Spencer Schubert, is the proprietor of E.S. Schubert Sculpture Studios, a sculpture studio in Kansas City, Missouri. He specializes in over life-size and monumental scale sculpture. Spencer Schubert is often called upon to enlarge small-scale models into life-size or over life-size models. And to do this, he uses various devices for enlarging, preferring to work by hand rather than enlarge digitally. And it's his experience with enlarging that led Schubert to create a set of proportional compasses that were dependable and versatile enough to meet his demands when he found other commercially available compasses just weren't up to the task. Spencer Schubert has sent me a pair of his proportional compasses, which he's made commercially available through his website, eschubert.com, and also through Amazon. I own several pairs of enlarging compasses, and Schubert's do indeed stand out as more rugged, made as they are of stainless steel rather than brass or aluminum like my other ones, and they have a superior adjusting mechanism and a large number of enlargement settings. I talked to Spencer Schubert and asked him to explain how he uses proportional compasses and what makes for a good pair. But I also wanted to know more about Spencer himself. It seems like every figurative sculptor I know takes a unique path in both their education and their professional career, and Spencer Schubert is no exception.
So I graduated, I went to the University of Kansas, and I actually started in metalsmithing. Just kind of a weird circumstance in high school. There was this one teacher that had created basically a collegiate level silversmithing program.
Wow.
And I played 3 sports up until, junior year when I found the silversmithing room. And at that, basically that was it. And I was like, ooh, making things. I've always wanted to do this, and by senior year, I think I just played football, and I was in the jewelry room all day long. And I got a scholarship to KU because of, mostly because of my enthusiasm coupled with the skill and guidance of my teacher, right? It wasn't like I was making these amazing things. It was just that I wanted to do it, and I had really quality help. And so I got a scholarship to KU.
And then for metalsmithing, for silversmithing?
For silversmithing,
wow.
Yeah. And I was an 18-year-old know-it-all, and the high school program was very craft focused, right? Mm-hmm. Clean solder seams, high polished. We're making salt and pepper shakers and goblets and things like that. Wow. And the KU program was really arts focused, more creativity and ideas and metalsmithing, which I just really wasn't into. And, I'm a craft is my beginning, right? If we get to art, great, but craft has to be there first, right? And so I switched to sculpture kind of as a screw you guys, you do it wrong kind of thing, and then here we are, right? So I've always, I'm a really good friend of mine who is an abstract landscape painter, likes to joke that I'm just your quintessential butch sculptor, right? I like lifting heavy things and making big stuff, and so really what I do is make bronze monuments. The bigger the better. I do a lot of portrait busts, but really what I'm trying to focus on is making statues that are larger than life size.
Right. A monumentalist.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. So you do a fair bit of enlarging in your studio. Now you have an enlarging machine, is that correct?
That's true. Yeah. So I have 2 3D pantographs, one which is assembled and working, and the other which is in pieces. And I don't know, may never be put together again.
Right. Now this is an alternative to the digital enlarging that a lot of people are getting into these days. That's correct?
Yeah. I just have never been comfortable with the way that digital enlarging is typically done. Now I think tools are important and they all have their uses. But typically the way people use digital enlargement is as a shortcut that almost ends up being the final destination, right? They laser scan the maquette, and every maquette has mistakes, period, right? End of story.
Right.
But they don't, foam enlargement doesn't really offer you a good way to fix those mistakes. And also timelines are so tight these days, right? And I think it's just a really easy way to not have a finished sculpture that is really stands on its own.
Right. No, I totally understand. I actually just mentioned in the last podcast about Michelangelo's David that when you enlarge from a small scale into something monumental scale, you also enlarge your mistakes, unless you are you're editing as you go, of course. When you enlarge, basically your bozzetto, your maquette is your first draft. Your enlargement is your second draft. And so you get a chance to make corrections and even alter the design that really, you can't really do too easily with three-dimensional or foam, as you mentioned.
Well, yeah, and there's a foundry in the Midwest that they specialize in doing foam enlargements and stuff, and I've had conversations with them, and they always try to convince me, oh no, it's really easy to shape the foam and carve the foam, and I agree with them. It is very easy to do that. The problem is that when you're enlarging with a pantograph, you're enlarging from the inside out, right? So you have to build up to the final surface. When you're enlarging with foam, you would have to then carve back into the foam enlargement. And I think psychologically that's just a different thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, I agree. I totally agree. There's a huge difference between carving and modeling.
And it's obviously there's, I would say, 80-90% of the skills translate one to the other. You get a sense of form, but your process is very different, and actually your final work is different. It's very easy when you're building up in clay to leave your hollows a little bit more hollow, and which is nice. It sort of exaggerates form in a pleasing way. But it's kind of the opposite when you're carving down. You'll leave your extremities a little bit more extreme. Sometimes it's easier. It's easier to do less in either material, but you're going in opposite directions, and so so it leaves a different. I guess you could say it leaves a different handwriting in your work if you start one way and finish the other, which might not be a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to sound like I'm a Luddite or that I'm against new technologies or anything. I mean, every tool has its place, but I think sometimes
you're a
shortcuts. Yeah, exactly.
You're a craftsman. You're a sculptor because you like to sculpt.
Yeah, for sure. That's the truth. I like to make big things. I don't like to have big things made for me, right?
Awesome. Yeah. So could you describe exactly what a pantograph is for the people who aren't familiar with that?
Sure. And it's a fair question because when I started, even after I had graduated from college and when I was a full-time sculptor, I didn't really know what a pantograph was. I knew that I wanted to make big sculptures in an accurate way, right? It's kind of silly to just start making an 8-foot tall sculpture with, lumps of clay the size of a baseball, right?
Yeah, but that's how everybody does it these days when they want to go life size. They start out life size. Yeah.
It's just crazy. So I did a lot of internet research, looked, and I actually found, I think in Michigan there's a college that has a sculptor's studio, and
Hillsdale probably Hillsdale College, I think. Yeah.
That may be it. And it was a sculptor who was well known. I can't remember his name, but there was photos.
Sorry, keep interrupting.
No, it's okay. It's okay. But there was photos online of this thing that was clearly an enlarging machine, right? Mm-hmm. And so I called them and asked them for photos, and they sent them to me. And so basically this slow research process, I found out what a 3D pantograph was, which basically it's just a geometrical way of finding points on a small thing and translating them into a big thing, or vice versa. I mean, an enlarging machine is also a reducing machine, right? Depending on how you use it. Right. So really, at its simplest form, it's a boom arm, like a long arm with a counterweight so that the arm balances fairly well. And on the arm is a parallelogram, and the parallelogram has joints at each of the 4 corners so that the 2 pointers will move in parallel, right?
So the parallelogram is sort of a framework, a metal frame?
Yeah, sort of framework. Like if you took 4 rulers and put a bolt through each corner, made a square out of them, that's basically what it is. It's really the same thing as those drawing tools you could buy off the TV when you were a kid that would help you, make your small drawing into a bigger drawing. It's basically that with a 3rd dimension added.
Right.
And it's one of those things in life that is very simple but not easy, right? So it's a very simple machine, but it takes me about 2 days to get it all set up using a laser level and like plumb bobs and everything, because it's, when you're enlarging, a 1/4 of an inch of mistake on the maquette, if you're enlarging 3 times, is suddenly 3/4 of an inch of a mistake. Right. And there's the extra dimension too. And that's the thing about the pantograph that continuously surprises me and everybody else too. If you look at a 24-inch tall maquette and then a 6-foot tall sculpture, those don't look like 1:3, right? Right. It looks like the maquette is much smaller than 1/3 of the large one, but because it's volumetric, because it's in 3 dimensions, it truly is. And it gets me every time. I'm like, this isn't possibly 1/3 that size.
Yeah. No, I run into the same thing, when I tell I'll teach a workshop, I'll be like, we're doing half-life size figures. And people get this idea that it's going to be, pretty big, half-life size. Right. And it seems a lot smaller, but, then I have to explain, no, it's volumetric. So it's half as tall, but half as thin and half as deep. And so it's actually 1/8 the volume.
Exactly. So that's what a pantograph is. I mean, there's a lot of different iterations of them. I think when you and I spoke before, there's the how do you pronounce it? Collis machine?
I think Collis or Colis. I'm not sure.
Collis.
I've never actually heard anyone pronounce it before.
Right, I know.
It's something you only find on the internet. Yeah.
I know. If you search the internet, you can find like these terrible black and white photographs from 60 years ago of a newspaper article from 50 years before that, right? Of these machines. So that's, and actually the way I have my pantograph is kind of interesting. I built one with a friend of mine who is kind of a machinist.
Awesome.
And then as soon as I finished building it, I found a foundry in Pennsylvania that was selling theirs because they had moved on to digital enlarging. Mm-hmm. So I purchased the pantograph that I use. It's gigantic. Takes up a space that's like 20 feet long and about 8 feet wide. They had just stopped using it because, of course, for a foundry, foam enlarging is amazing, right?
Yeah, I mean, the labor, the costs,
right.
and the skill as well.
Yeah, and they can just cut it in half using a saw and then make a mold of that. Or, it basically, for a person who has to move things around, foam enlargement is just absolutely genius. But, for a person who is really worried about form and an object being beautiful, a pantograph, I think, is the way to go. So
I agree. So this brings us actually to the point of
right.
our conversation. In your enlarging, you use enlarging compasses. And these are like regular compasses. Everyone knows what I'm talking about, sort of ice pick sort of looking things, but not the wooden ones that you use to take measurements off your live model when you're doing a portrait. These are going to be steel or some sort of metal, but they're going to be scissor shaped, right? So they open at both ends.
Right.
Would that be a good way of sort of explaining?
Yeah, that's a fair way to say it. If the scissors had no handles, if it had two cutting ends, right?
Right. And so if you measure from one end, let's say the small end, then you open it up and the joint is placed along the length of these scissors. That at the other end you get a multiple of the measurement at the first end.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, they're pretty neat. And when we spoke the first time, I think you said, well, I wouldn't imagine that you needed them because you have a pantograph, right?
Right.
But they're so useful for double checking on the pantograph, making sure that my armature is within the final surface, right? So I can on the pantograph I can find points, but it doesn't show me that the arm is going to be 3 inches wide. And so with the pantograph and the compasses or calipers, right, as we States call them, you can really kind of get the armature in just the right spot. And then also I use them, when I'm doing portrait busts and things of that nature all the time. I mean, they're just, for a sculptor, they're almost an indispensable tool, and there just is not, before the ones that we started creating, there's just not a really quality solution.
Yeah. So why did you make your own proportional compasses? What specifically was sort of lacking in the ones that you were able to get commercially?
Well, so actually, it started with the Sculptor's Apprentice videos that I do, and at that point when I started them, so the ones that they sell commercially have kind of a moving pivot. And I noticed that unless you're super, super careful with the calipers, which, who's careful with a tool in a sculpture studio, right? That pivot point can move. And so suddenly if I'm enlarging this head and then I set the calipers down and I move the pivot, then suddenly every other measurement is going to be wrong. It's just a terrible, I don't know who thought that was the right solution.
Now, when you say the pivot moves, that's because the pivot is lying sort of in sort of a trench cut in the center of each arm of the compass. Right?
Yeah.
And so it can move, and so you get sort of an infinite, variation of, you can enlarge 3 times life size or 3.05 life size, depending on where you put the pivot.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I think that is the one benefit of them. But I think typically those sell for like $90. It's pretty standard.
Yeah, I actually have a pair that I bought a decade ago, and I think it was about $80. I think I got it from the Complete Sculptor. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they sell them. I think Sculpt.com sells them. I think even Dick Blick sells the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But, so I would be doing specific enlargement scales on a head, because my maquette was a certain size and I needed the finished one to be a specific size. And I would just live in fear that pivot was going to get bumped. So I went to a local shop and I said, hey, can you just cut me out a whole bunch of these shapes in aluminum? Because it's a mirrored shape, right? So one side is exactly the same as the other. And then that way I could drill my own pivot point. And it would be set forever. Those, forever that set of calipers would just enlarge 3.125 times, right?
Right.
And then because of that, I did a video, just kind of showing people how to do it because, I had the ones that I made, I had them water jet cut out of aluminum. but they're really easy to make if you have a template, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it just started with me making a video saying, hey, if you want to make some, calipers or compasses, so I made the video basically showing people how to make calipers, because you can make them out of plexiglass, you could make them out of wood. And the Sculptor's Apprentice video series is really just trying to show people how to do things that I had to dig and dig and dig to find out how to do, right? Because like you said in one of your earlier podcasts, the apprentice system is gone. I would have learned all this stuff from a master if I had had the ability to do that, but I didn't. And so that's why it's called the Sculptor's Apprentice. But in making those calipers, I had a couple people email me and say, hey, can you just sell me some? Because I don't have a bandsaw and a sander to cut these out and blah, blah, blah. And so I just decided, well, we'll just, maybe I'll see if I can make the pair of calipers that I would want to buy. Right. And that's what I ended up doing. And so, they're made out of stainless steel. They have the typical enlarging sizes that you would need, right?
Actually, I was quite surprised that you have you actually have quite a variety of enlargement ratios that I really like. I actually have two other types of enlargement compasses, and one has sort of the fixed pivot, but it just goes 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, and that's it.
Right.
But you have 1 to 2. No, you have 1 to 1.25. 1 to you probably know better than I do.
No, I actually don't. I've actually, it's been so long since I've looked at which ones, because I almost always just use 3.
Okay. But I think you have like 1.75 and 2 and 2.5 and 3 and 4 and 5. So quite a variety.
Yeah, and really the reason that I had those is because I just sat down and kind of did the equations, and I knew I was going to use stainless steel, which is considerably more durable than aluminum.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to see I wanted to put as many holes, as many potential scales as I could, and those seemed to be the reasonable ones to use. So yeah, the stainless steel, it's really almost all of the expense of making them is in the labor of cutting them out. The material is really a nominal choice. And I've bent my aluminum calipers so many times I just thought.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
it's okay.
I have, like I said, I have two other types, and one is made of brass, and one is aluminum, the Sculpture House or whatever, Sculpture Depot or wherever I got them, and they bend, and you have to sort of realign the tips, and it's once you bend one of those forks in the wrong direction, it's going to be almost impossible to get it back so it's measuring the correct ratio. So I think stainless steel is absolutely the way to go. And they're beautiful, and they feel good in the hand. Yeah, they're beautiful.
Yeah, they have a really nice weight to them. When I had them made, I got a couple of different samples, and the difference between holding the aluminum ones and holding the stainless steel ones, it's like, wow, this is a tool that I could hand down to my children,
Yeah, they're really nice.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And that's really, I think we're going to be releasing some other tools at some point in the future. There aren't that many readily available quality sculpture tools.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are. It's funny. It's like it's because there aren't very many sculptors either. At least sculptors who know what quality tools are. Just like clay. When you buy clay, if you buy water-based clay, you have to go to a ceramics place. People who make clay for potters. Even if you go to a sculpture supply place, they're selling ceramic clay. Sculptor's clay is a different thing, and most people don't even realize that there is such a thing as sculptor's clay, as distinct from ceramic clay. Yeah, it's true, but I think things are coming back. I mean, it's really interesting. You're the last of the 3 interviews that I'm talking to for this episode, and all 3 of you guys have backgrounds in making things beyond sculpture. You're a silversmith. The other 2 started out as woodworkers, and they make beautiful wooden clay modeling tools. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. And when I went to, the University of Kansas, and the Midwest kind of do it yourself attitude, my sculpture professor, John Hockmeister, he was all about making your own tools. And at the time, it seemed like that was kind of his own specific way of operating in the world. Right. But as I graduated, I realized, well, no, he was telling us how to do these things because he knew we wouldn't be able to find what we needed, right? He knew that once we left school, we were going to have to figure out how to turn a bandsaw blade into a modeling tool, right? And so I've got a lot of handmade tools just because, Kemper clay tools typically don't handle my abuse for more than a day or two, you know?
Right. So let's get back to proportional compasses because
Sure.
I think they're fantastic, but I don't think a lot of sculptors know how to use them. For instance, if you're
Right.
enlarging, you can enlarge without using a pantograph, of course,
Right.
and you can do so using enlarging compasses. But there are some pitfalls, I think, using
Yeah,
compasses.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's kind of, it is difficult because, you know, the triangulation you're talking about is, you know, the whole issue with enlarging things in 3 dimensions, right? The compasses, the calipers are a 2-dimensional tool, basically, right? There's no third
Exactly.
dimension.
Yeah, they're exactly a 2-dimensional tool. Yeah.
And so really when you're just kind of free enlarging, they're mainly useful for double checking your eye.
Right.
And so, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And in fact, it kind of relates directly. I think you mentioned the marble. What is it? What do you call it? A pointing machine?
Pointing machine, macchinetta a punto is what the Italians call it. There's no sort of word or name for it. It's just pointing machine in English. But
right.
Yeah, but it is very similar to a pantograph in the sense that it finds a point from X, Y, Z coordinates. It finds 3-dimensional
Right.
coordinates. It's and that's exactly what a pantograph, sculpture pantograph does. But yeah, compasses.
Right.
Compasses don't. They measure from point A to point B with no, and they just measure the distance between those 2 points. They measure the distance between the 2 points, but not the relation between the 2 points in space. And this is where I think a lot of sculptors run into problems because, you buy your little beginner set of sculpture tools and you get your sponge and you get your kidney and you get these tools and then you get a set of compasses. And they go, these must be for measuring. And so they'll measure the distance from the nose to the eye and the, corner of the mouth to whatever. And think that, well, if the measurement is correct, then the placement must be correct. Yeah.
Right.
It all comes down to triangulation.
That's a bit, yeah, that is one of the biggest mistakes I think with people who are first time using them. And the way that when I have used them in that way, say on a portrait bust or something where clearly I'm not using the pantograph, I typically try to find 3 points from the beginning that are close enough for right now. So, I'll make a little Sharpie mark on the front center of my modeling board, and then I'll try to find, the top outside of each brow.
Okay.
And then so basically the way I use them basically in that situation is the same way everyone should be sculpting, which is constantly checking things against one another, right? I mean, I feel like if I'm not moving my sculpture around a lot, things get off quickly. And so, really what I would do is I would check that measurement from that mark of the Sharpie on the modeling board up to the outside of the brow, and then I'll double check the other one and make sure they're existing in a similar plane, right? And their measurement is close. And then that way you can start checking other measurements, but for each measurement, you almost have to take 3 measurements, right? So to find
absolutely. Yeah. So for instance, to find the tip of the nose, you would measure from that mark on your base and then also from each brow.
Exactly. And that's not going to be exact, but it is going to help you kind of train your eye to be able to see those relationships. I would, for a smaller sculpture, I think if you're doing a portrait bust that's 125% of life size, right, which is a pretty typical monumental but interior portrait bust size. After a year of using the calipers, the compasses to check your measurements, you should be able to put them away and just kind of go for it. And your eye, I think, should be trained enough to really kind of get those relationships intuitively.
Sure. It should be. That's certainly the goal, I would think.
Yeah, it's like training wheels, and also, sometimes, sometimes I'll be staring at a portrait bust and I'm like, something is not quite right. We all have those moments where we just aren't our best sculptor selves. And at that point, the compasses, the calipers can be a really useful tool to be like, the forehead is about a ½ inch too far forward, right? And I think that's the way I use them mostly these days. Is just when I'm stuck.
Yeah, double checking and figuring out.
Yeah. Yeah,
well,
really useful.
It's so funny. Now, you've never carved marble, right? You've never used a pointing machine.
Never.
What you figured out on your own is exactly how marble is carved.
Really?
Yeah, you start with 3 given points. If you're using a machinetta, there are 3 basically small holes that you drill into your stone, and then you build a tripod that sits in those 3 holes. And then you put
Okay.
3 nails in your plaster cast that you're copying from, and then the tripod sits exactly on those 3 nails. And so you can move the
Okay.
tripod, over, from one, from your plaster cast to your marble. And all the machinetta is, all the pointing machine is just a needle on an adjustable arm that sits on the tripod.
Okay.
So you touch the
Okay.
end of the needle to the nose on the plaster cast, and you lock everything into place. You pick it up, you put it on your marble, and now that needle is pointing into the marble at exactly the place where the nose needs to be. So it's still XYZ, but yeah, so it's still using 3 points to locate a 4th. And those,
Yeah.
and if you've ever been into a museum where they've got some antique plaster casts on display, and there's little pencil marks or maybe even nails driven into the plaster
Right.
casts, those are what the Italians call capopunti, or head points, which are exactly what you're talking about, what you put in the eyebrows and what you put on the base. Those nails are
Yeah.
points from which other places are measured.
That's great.
Yeah,
Well,
it's cool.
funny that
You
say that.
reinvented sculpture.
I reinvented sculpture. Oh, every day, every single day, right? Well,
Excellent.
I mean, this is I'm really happy with where I am and how I got here. But if I, in another alternate plane, I really wish that some version of the apprentice system still existed, because, and selfishly, I mean, I wish it for the larger world of sculpture, because I love the world of sculpture. But for myself, there are so many things that I just had to figure out through dumb luck and trial and error and spending a lot of money on things that didn't end up working.
Yeah.
And it's all because, because KU, the school, University of Kansas, where I went, it was a sculpture school, an art school with lots of facilities. I mean, a beautiful foundry, an incredible metal room and wood room, but nobody was teaching the craft of making clay or marble look like a person. I feel like I would have saved myself 5 years of struggle if I could have just, apprenticed for somebody. But
Right. Well, I think your experience is like a lot of other sculptors out there, where you just had to, to some extent make it up as you go along and reinvent the wheel. And certainly my own experience echoes that. And actually also what another thing we share in common is the idea of, passing on that information, getting out there. And that's the whole
right,
point of this podcast is
the ball rolling to
get the
the other
knowledge.
people.
Yeah, get the knowledge out there so it doesn't, die with me. Not that I discovered
Yeah,
anything. Yeah, we
but
need to
passing
help
it
each
on.
other out. We need to, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Absolutely. And I got to tell you, when I'm an avid podcast and audiobook listener. And I mean, over the years, I have many times typed in sculpture or sculptor into that iTunes search bar to see something. And when your podcast popped up, I literally gasped out loud and said, honey, come here. You got to see this. There's actually a podcast, because there's just, none. So
That's
thank you.
exactly my experience. I looked for years and years doing exactly the same thing, typing in sculpture into iTunes. And finally I was just like, well, I'll try it. And
Yeah.
that's the whole reason. I wish someone else had done it.
I know
It's
exactly,
a lot
but
of
then you
work.
had and well, a lot of the greatest things in the history of mankind is somebody saying, God, I wish somebody would have done this. I wish somebody would have done this. Oh, I guess I have to do it myself, So, I mean, and that's why the Sculptor's Apprentice video series that I'm doing, and then actually you encouraged me to start up again, and there'll be another episode coming out here pretty soon. In fact, it's the pantograph explanation episode that you asked for.
Fantastic. Well, let me give you a plug right now. The Sculptor's Apprentice is your YouTube channel, correct?
Yes, yeah, and I think there's only like 4 or 5 videos up there.
Okay.
But it's all about it's not about how to sculpt. It's not about how to make clay look like people, because I think that's something that with a lump of clay and a whole bunch of time, a person could figure out to do by themselves. But things like how to, about the compasses, the calipers, how to drill a hole in a marble base, things that I had to figure out myself, or, ask somebody who may or may not still be around because they were old enough at the time. I've always believed that if you have to keep something a secret so that you can make money, you're doing something wrong, right? Yeah, it's this huge thing to be able to tell. I mean, I could tell a beginning sculptor student, I could tell them absolutely everything I know. I could tell them how I carve the clay, how I shape the clay, and they're going to make a completely different sculpture than me just because that's the nature of the thing, right? So why not tell them everything I know using YouTube, right? So that's the plan.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, and I applaud you for it. I really do. I think more people should be out there spreading the word, getting the knowledge out.
Yeah, and it is tough because, I want to be a sculptor. I don't want to be a sculpture teacher, but at the same time, I feel a responsibility to my craft.
Excellent.
So,
well, Spencer Schubert, thank you so much for coming on The Sculptor's Funeral. This has been a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much for having it so that I could come on it.
Oh, wait a minute. Before I sign off like that, though, if people are interested in getting your proportional compasses, where can they find them? Where can people buy your proportional compasses?
Sure. So they are for sale on Amazon, but that is only in the United States. So if somebody that is not in the States wants a pair, I would be happy to sell them to them. We'll figure out a shipping situation. You can just email me. Is that the best way to? Should they contact me through the Facebook page that you have, or what's easier?
They could. It'd probably be best just to contact you directly. You have a website, right? thesculptorsapprentice.com.
Thesculptorsapprentice.com is the website, and you can email me from there if you're interested. If you're out of the States, if you're in the United States, you can just buy them on Amazon.com. Just search proportional calipers. And I think they're the only ones for sale on there. And then if you have any other questions, feel free. I'm happy to email. I also regularly check the Sculptor's Funeral Facebook page just to see what interesting things you've said lately. So if they want to message me there, they can too, or whatever. I'm happy to talk.
Fantastic. Well, Spencer Schubert, thank you once again for talking with me on The Sculptor's Funeral. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun, and I sincerely appreciate you doing the podcast from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much. My final guest is one that many listeners will be familiar with. If you spend any time on social media sites like Facebook or Pinterest and have an interest in sculpture, you have undoubtedly come across the work of Philippe Faraut. His style is unmistakable and all his own, with impeccable craftsmanship and a stylish and stylized handling. He's also a popular instructor, giving workshops and lessons in his studio in upstate New York, as well as producing several instructional books and DVDs. In addition to sculpting and teaching, Faraut has his own line of modeling tools and equipment, all of which he makes himself by hand in his workshop and sells through his website, philippefaraut.com. Philippe Faraut's sculpture has proven to be popular not just with sculptors, but with a much larger audience, especially on the internet. And before I got to talking about Philippe Faraut's tools, I had to tell him why I hadn't yet friended him on Facebook. I tried, but Faraut's Facebook account has maxed out the number of friends he's allowed to have at 5,000. Such is the price of internet fame.
Well, the thing is, I say I don't know any. 99% of them I don't know. You know how Facebook goes.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. Yeah, but I have a ways to go before I have 5,000 friends, though. But
well, it will happen.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I just wanted to let you know that I tried.
I'm so computer illiterate that I barely know how to use this thing. So I don't really know. Usually my daughter takes care of it. I don't have time.
No, I would stay off of it if I could, but it's too helpful for the podcast and for my business and everything. And
absolutely. We use it. Of course, it's a big part of our business, but the time it takes to learn it and to take care of it.
Yeah.
Social media and all these things, I really don't care for it, but
yeah.
We're stuck with it.
Well, actually, that's interesting. One of the things I wanted to talk to you today about was your business. Actually, now you make your tools, the wooden tools that you sell on your website. You make them right in your studio. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, I make them myself. Yes.
All of them, like yourself. You don't have any employees helping you. You do it yourself.
No, I don't.
Wow.
Actually, I turn them and send them. Actually, I turn them and then I sand them a bit, and then one of my daughter sand them a bit more, and the other daughter varnishes them. it's a family business.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let me ask you, what led you to come to design and make your own tools?
Well, it started a long time ago when I started teaching. I was teaching doll making for. It was doll sculpting actually. I was teaching. It was about 20 some years ago. The industry, the doll industry, porcelain doll industry was very big, and I just stumbled onto it, and I started teaching mostly middle-aged to older ladies how to sculpt baby doll heads. Basically, that was how I made a living. And at the beginning, from the beginning, it was obvious that the most difficult part for these people who had no training was to sculpt the eyes. And I think one time I was with my wife in Indiana teaching, and it was in the evening. We were in a restaurant, and I was quite discouraged by the results I was getting from my students. And I don't remember if she came up with the idea, or if I did, of making a tool that would facilitate the shaping of the eye. And so I designed this little tool that I made, with a sandpaper and a file and stuff. And it turned out that not only it helped them, but it helped me. It was a fast way to get the shape, approximately the shape of the eye without too much trouble. And so for years and years, I would buy some dowels before each class, and I would make them by hand. It would take me several hours to make 15 tools. And at some point, it was becoming too much work, so I actually made a little lathe. And
Right.
I designed a pattern, and I was able to make them faster, more efficiently, and more all equal, about all the same.
They're absolutely beautiful tools. I actually have some students that have some, and I've stolen them away and used them. And yeah, the eye tool is great. It's let me sort of describe it a little bit. Basically, it's a double-ended wooden modeling tool, and it has sort of almost like a tapered, almost to a point, sort of a concave cup that sort of gives you the shape of sort of a section of a sphere. And you got a different size on each end, and it's perfect. It'll fit right into the inside corner, in sort of almost underneath the eyelids, right on the surface of the eyeball. And it's great for the corners of the mouth too, I've found.
Yes, I use it for pretty much everything on the face, the ears, nose, mouth. A tool is the extension of your hand, and you get used to one in particular, and you can never let it go. And actually, I started manufacturing them. Manufacturing is a big word, but because my students were stealing them. Class, I was missing some of them, so I always had to replace them. So finally, I came up with a way to make them that wasn't too laborious.
Now, in addition to the eye tool, you have what you call finger tools, or maybe that's what I call them.
Yes, these were designed because same problem basically. I was looking for a faster way to do fingers and fingernails, and I had seen other artists using gouges,
right.
Metal gouges. So I'm a wood carver by trade, so I use my own gouges that were out of metal to do the fingernails and do the fingers, a little bit like Bruno Lucchesi does in his books and DVDs. And so it's not an original idea, but what happened is the same thing as I was teaching. I realized that there was a need for my students to use the tool that I had been using for 20 years. I made some of them out of aluminum because the metal was rusting. And if you did an oil it every time you finish working with them, they would get rusty.
Sure.
So I made them out of aluminum, and same thing, they're made here in my studio.
Amazing, really. Wow. I was going to ask you about that. I figured that you probably had it, jobbed out to a metal shop, but you actually do it yourself.
it goes like this. It's I designed them and made some stamping mechanical thing, and there is a shop in town that roughed them out for me.
I see.
And then I have to finish them by hand and polish them. But actually, I was never really pleased with this design. And lately, I have a friend of mine who is in mold making, who offered me to redesign them and make them out of high quality plastic in 5 different sizes. And they are much slicker, and the curves is more consistent. And they have one end that is like a gouge, but square at the end, and the other end has a curve. So when you do fingernails, it fits just exactly right curvature of the fingernails. So these tools are not going to be available for another 2-3 months, I believe. But when they are, I think they will be very useful to do this thing. And they're great for toes, and I use them a lot when I do curly hair. I twist them as I rotate. As I pull, I rotate them, and they give me nice curves.
They're available in a set of 4, I've seen. So they're like different sizes for, I guess, different size fingers, or different radiuses of curves, I guess.
Yes, that's right. Actually, the new set will have 5 because I was missing a size in it. I didn't like, and so I made there's a 5th one actually that the designer came up with. I didn't come up with this one, but and it fits. It's a better range. I think they will be useful. I mean, I have the prototype that he sent me, and they're great. I've been using it for the last 2 weeks every day, and I really like them.
So now these tools, the finger tools, the ones that are in aluminum now but will be available in a few weeks or a few months, I should say, in a durable plastic. Are they going to be the same price, the new tools, as the aluminum tools?
I don't know. I haven't priced them.
Right.
It will really depend on the manufacturing price.
Sure. And right now the aluminum tools go for $15 each, or a set of 4 for $50, according to your website. Is that right?
Yeah,
that's actually a great price, I have to say. And also your eye tool is $12, and that is something that is handmade, and I think that's an absolutely fantastic price.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, and just looking at the rest of your online store, you offer a clay modeling stand for $115, a bust armature for $18. These are all very, very, very economical. I mean, these blow prices from other sort of the large online sculpture retailers out of the water.
Right. I manufacture everything. I do it all myself, the stands, the tools, even the flat tool, the plane tool, same thing. So I can keep the cost pretty low, and they are not necessarily a way to make a living. If I were waiting for that to feed my family, I don't think I could. But what they are is they are always available for my students. I teach several classes a year, and I have a lot of students, and so they're available here. And it started like this. I just wanted them available to my students,
right?
Because I couldn't find in what I was looking for out there. So, and I also wanted my students to have all the tools on hand when they came to my class. They didn't have to buy anything particular, or they just could come with their tools or with that tools, and they always had what they needed. So that's how it started, and I put them on the market just because I could, and I think they're useful. I mean, the plane tool is one of the tools I use the most.
Now, can you describe it? It's a wooden modeling tool, and it's a sort of a flat blade with a square end. Is that correct?
It has a square end, and the other end it has an angle. And I think it's this angle is just the right angle for me, at least. some of the tools that I found out there have an angle that is too sharp, so that it's too pointy. And when I use this, I work a lot in planes, and when I use this angle side of the tool, it just fits right for me.
Right, right. Are you like me where you have like 1,000 different modeling tools and you use 3?
That's right.
Yeah. It's funny that way. You just, you try them all and then you realize that there are 3 that work just for you. And it's almost like, it almost develops your handwriting as a modeler in a way. The tools you use sort of determine what sort of marks you make and how you handle the surface. And yeah, everyone just gets comfortable. A lot of my students ask me which tools do they use for which, purposes. And whenever your thumb isn't working, pick up a tool, and if it works better, that's the tool to use.
That's right. And some of my students come and they're used to their own tool and they don't use mine. They come and they're doing their work as good as it can be, just using their own tools. So I think it's a question of habit, I suppose.
Yeah, personal preference. Now, finally, I want to get to one last thing that you offer on your online store that I think is just fantastic and perhaps unique. Your plaster casts. Now, there's a lot of suppliers of plaster casts out there, but the ones that you offer are not cast from the antique or from the Renaissance or from the 19th century, but they're casts of your own work. All the anatomical studies and facial feature studies are studies that you've produced yourself. And I don't know of another sculptor who does that. And I think it's great. I think it's really, really a very cool thing. I think other sculptors should do it too. And also it's, again, along with everything else in your store, very economical. You've got like an écorché head study or a skull or a small torso for something like $75 and $30 for an expression mask. I think that's a fraction of the price of the average cost of a
Well,
cast.
it all comes down to the same thing, is most of the work was done for my students.
Right.
And actually, most of my work was done for teaching purposes. If you look at pretty much everything that I've produced in the last 20 years, most of it was done for education purposes. They ended up either in my videos or in my books or as casts that I sell. I'm more of a teacher than an artist, and I have more of a technician than a... Actually, in France, a lot of people, my books are translated in French, and a lot of people critique my work as saying that I'm not a real artist, I'm more of a technician. All this work that I've done, that I've made available to my students and also to the public eventually, they were for education purposes.
Well, that's interesting because I think you're probably one of the more popular sculptors on social media today. Your work is very popular, very attractive, I think, to a lot of people. I like the way that you are definitely going for an ideal, but it's not a Greek ideal. It's your own personal ideal. It's interesting that you should be criticized for it because I think it's exceptional, and I think a lot of people would agree with me.
Well, thank you. A critic is always good. You change your point of view. So
Sure.
I like the critic. Doesn't matter where it's coming from. Actually, my wife has been my critic for 20 some years, and she's as involved in my success in parentheses as anybody, just because she was there to critique my work all along, still is. I don't think there's one piece that I've ever made where she doesn't have, if not her hand on it, her eye and her. So it's a teamwork.
Well, as popular as your work is, I'm wondering, do you ever get people who buy your plaster casts as sort of a less expensive alternative to owning a piece of your work?
I don't know. I'm not really sure. It's possible. I know that there are a lot of painters or draftsmen or digital sculptors that buy these as reference material.
Right.
I've seen a lot of reproduction of those casts in clay and in digital media. People using ZBrush use my cast. Because we don't always have a model available.
Right.
it's nice to have something three-dimensional that you can study and copy, basically. It was a tradition for a long time. You mentioned it a lot in your podcast, the study of cast during the L'École des Beaux-Arts, and they use that method a lot. So
Right.
I don't know the validity of the cast I produced as far as much as a tool to learn sculpture or style. It's not really valid, but it's more to study technique.
But I think it's exceedingly generous of you to offer your work the way you do as a teaching tool. Philippe Faraut, thank you so much for joining me on the Sculptor's Funeral today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, I want to thank you all very much for listening, and a very special thanks to the three sculptors I spoke to today, Matthew Kindy, Spencer Schubert, and Philippe Faraut. Don't forget, you can check out additional content at the Sculptor's Funeral YouTube channel or on our Facebook group page. And while you're there at the Facebook group page, you can join in the conversation. You can ask a question, leave a comment about the podcast or sculpture in general. You can post current events and anything you want, really. And you can also subscribe to the podcast at Stitcher Mobile, iTunes, or really subscribe from any service from which you get your podcasts and receive the podcast automatically on your PC, tablet, or mobile device every week. And if you want to leave a review of the podcast or wanted to give the podcast a rating on iTunes or wherever you subscribe, that would actually help the podcast out, so thanks for that. Check out the sculptorsfuneral.com website, where you can stream the complete archives of the show without having to subscribe to anything. Check out the image galleries for this and each episode, and click on the sponsor of the podcast, Blick Art Supplies, while you're there. Clicking on the link and buying from Blick helps to support the podcast, and for that, I truly thank you. Thanks again for listening, and have a productive week.